I mean, I left the clinic after my consult like distraught because it makes me so angry because they showed me these numbers and said, basically, you're done. Like, you're 37, you're done.
I'm your host, life coach Emma Wilson, and I'm here to help you feel better, get unstuck, and be more confident in your 30s. I am really excited about today's guest episode. We had such an amazing conversation. It was authentic, it was vulnerable, it was very important, the topics that we were talking about, and a topic that I hold very close to my heart, which is fertility awareness. We talked about egg freezing. We also spoke about timelines and dating and how to accept your own path, which, as we all know, is a huge part of the work I put out into the world and the mission that I'm on. So I really hope that you take a lot from this episode, because I definitely took a lot from recording it. Before I introduce the guest and share the episode with you, I wanted to just thank you all for supporting Turning 30, because I noticed that in the last couple of weeks, the reviews from the podcast were up. The amount of ratings I have got on Spotify was also up. I really feel that the community is becoming a community, and a huge part of that is welcoming in people into my new community, Turning, which is a sacred space, a sacred online space for women in their 30s to be heard, to learn, to evolve, to grow, to connect, and really to make new friends. And it's been so fun. The doors actually are now closed and will be opening up again in a week, I think, from the date that you're listening to this episode. But definitely go and check that, because I have set the time to open it, but I'm always get a bit crazy and excited when it comes to launches and change the dates last minute. What I will say is that the 30 founding members that I have invited in are already connecting with each other. Really exciting. Within the first 3 days, 2 of the women in the membership realized that they were going to be in Hong Kong at the same time. One of them lives there, another one's visiting for a conference. So they will have already met up now, but at this point in time, they just messaged in the community group to tell us that they were meeting up, which is so fun, because the biggest thing for me is knowing that there are so many of us, women in our 30s, who are craving those connections and craving those friendships that really lift you up. And we often feel so different to those people around us and feel that everybody is on a different timeline, something that we are talking about a lot in today's episode. But I think that we often feel that when we're alone, there's no one to turn to and no one who can listen to us. And I can speak for my own journey, really find comfort in listening to podcasts and reading books and Instagram accounts that feel like home. But we don't actually ever take it that one step further and make the effort to go out there and meet the people who are also going through the same thing. So the membership community has been something that I have been planning and dreaming and visioning up for the past years. And it's nearly 8 years since I started Turning 30. And really, I just feel immense gratitude and really proud to bring this community to light and to invite you all in. And something that is a new concept that I am going to be doing is that with each podcast guest, I will, at the end of our episode, switch to questions that were asked specifically by the women in the community. And there'll be a short segment, which is exclusive podcast material that will be shared in the community. So what that means is, if you're a member, you will have exclusive content and the continuation of the podcast episode. So whenever you're ready to join us and hear that content, please feel free to sign up. You are all invited. There are no limits. So today's guest is Beth Gulotta. Beth is a therapist, and she has a podcast called Quiet the Clock, which is a podcast specifically aiming for women who are defying societal timelines, defying the pressure, and living their life on their own terms. She wants to empower women to break free from the expectations, the weight of the ticking clock, and a lot of her work involves speaking to on her podcast women who are going on their own fertility journeys, who are deciding to freeze their eggs. And as you'll hear, she is also going through her own fertility journey, and she also froze her eggs at the age of 37 and had her first baby at the age of 40. So I love Beth's community. I love her philosophy. We are very aligned. I was a guest on her podcast a couple of years ago when I was still single, and I think I was just about to freeze my eggs, or potentially had already frozen them, not quite sure. And we had such an amazing conversation. I knew how much you would all benefit from hearing Beth's story and hearing about fertility and all the topics we dive into today. So without further ado, please welcome Beth to the podcast. Hi, Beth, and welcome to the Turning 30 podcast.
Thank you. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to be here. I have loved and continue to love everything that you're doing in this space. So thank you so much for having me.
This conversation has been such a long time coming. I can't believe we're only having it now because, as we were just saying, our content and our missions could not be more aligned. And I remember when you originally reached out to me a couple of years ago now to invite me as a guest onto your amazing podcast, I think I just saw the name of the email and didn't even read the email. I was like, if somebody has a podcast called Quiet the Clock, that could not be more me with, what I talk about, what I'm going through. So lots of things have changed since I was a guest on yours, but we had an amazing conversation, and I'm excited to turn it around.
I know. It's so amazing that you say that. One of the things I've been thinking about doing is just sort of guest updates, because it's been and I think it's a testament to a lot of what we talk about in trusting the timing. I have so many guests whose lives have changed tremendously since they've been on. And that's funny you say that, because I was literally just thinking about doing updates, because I think it's so reassuring and hopeful and validates what we talk about, which is trust your own timing, trust your own journey. But I have guests on here that have become married, have become parents, had a breakup, and is now in a new relationship, and like just so many amazing updates. So yeah, things can change so quickly.
What a great idea. I would be happy to give my updates, but I want to hear your story, because I do know a bit from knowing you, but I would love for my audience, my community, to hear what led you to Quiet the Clock, to start this amazing podcast talking about timelines, talking very specifically about fertility and egg freezing. I know that it's connected to your own personal journey. So I would love to start there and hear how it was for you in your 30s and what led you to this work.
Yeah. I love sharing that. I mean, I had no idea that I would do a podcast. And I think, again, that's sort of just a testament to like letting life unfold and kind of learning as we go. But my journey was kind of the narratives I hear of, which is like being behind, running out of time. I had a breakup in my early 30s with someone that I thought I was going to have a future with. And then I was watching everybody around me get married and have kids and buy houses and do all of these, successful life milestones that we're told are, the goal. And I felt really terrible. I felt sad. I felt so much grief, self-judgment, external judgment. And so I kind of started the podcast to safeguard any woman from feeling like that, because when we're in that space, there's so many other amazing things happening that we're missing out on because we're so focused on that. So I met my partner at 34, which, the blueprint, we're told that's very late in the game. And we were enjoying our relationship. I got to be 37 and I was really feeling the angst of the timeline, specifically the biological timeline. So I made a decision to freeze my eggs at 37, and we can get more into that because that is so layered. I became a mom at 40 naturally, and I'm 43 now. We're trying for a second. So I'm still kind of in the timeline thing, being in the waiting, trusting the process, trusting my journey. But I was going through this journey personally and feeling all of these like heavy emotions. And then I was seeing it in my work. I was seeing all these incredible 30-something-year-old women coming to me with the same narratives, the same emotions. And I'm just like, oh, well, I'm not alone in this, and they're not alone in this. And we're all kind of going through this, but nobody's talking about it. So that really sparked this passion of mine to bring these conversations to the forefront, because not every woman meets these milestones when we're told we're supposed to meet them. And it creates so much anxiety and stress and sadness.
Yes. Here. But obviously, that's my mission as well. But I think what's really interesting about your journey is that we're partnered. You did have a partner, but you probably felt that many people around you, and maybe you can share a little bit about the experience of having a partner, but not feeling ready yet to have children, or deciding to wait, or deciding that it wasn't something for you that you wanted to do that minute. I'm not sure. You can maybe explain how that
Yeah,
was for you, but I think
I
that it will be interesting for people to hear about how that transition was from going to being partnered to then deciding, okay, the next steps.
yeah. Well, I think that's the thing about timelines too, is not everyone's are the same. And when you're in partnership, sometimes those things don't align up. And for me and my partner, they didn't. And that was hard for us. It was a lot of hard conversations to try to get on the same page and understand each other's timelines, understand each other's desires. I think the part of us meeting a little bit later contributed to where we ended up, because if we had met in my earlier 30s, I probably wouldn't have felt that anxiety. Like, I was really loving our relationship, loving being together. We traveled a lot. It just, the way it played out for us is that we did meet later in life. It's not that late, but if we're talking biologically. So it took us some time to get on the same page. And that's when I made the decision to freeze my eggs, just to, kind of have this safeguard or insurance policy, but we know it's not a full insurance policy. And then we did get a line, and I got pregnant at 39. And I think, advice I would share for women is being really upfront and clear when you're dating what you want by when you want it, and being really specific about that. Do you want one child? Do you want two child? Are you open to adoption? Are you, if that's, because these visions we have don't always unfold the way we imagine, and then we have to explore other options. So for us, it was just a matter of kind of getting on the same page.
And this topic is so important that you've just brought up about having those conversations at the start. I've just run a group program, my Next Chapter in Love program, and there was 40 women in there, all in their 30s, mostly, I would say 33, 34 plus, all the way up until 40. And a lot of the questions that we were talking about in our group coaching sessions was this question of, how do I communicate that at the start when I'm dating? Because it's so hard to find that balance between being authentic, being yourself, really having those big important conversations, but then not, quote unquote, scaring people away on the first date. But as I'm sure you experienced, and I can say for sure that I experienced it, that is that feeling of not wanting to waste time. And that for me wasn't like, okay, let's just wait until we're already together a few months and then bring it up. And I can share a little bit later on about how that worked in my relationship when we had those big conversations up front. But I think it's really difficult, and I'm sure you've experienced this with clients as well, is the question of how to open up that communication in a natural but honest way at the start of the relationship. And it's something that people struggle with it.
Yeah. I mean, first, it takes courage. It's a vulnerability to it, right? And it can be very difficult to be vulnerable. So I want to honor that part of it. It's interesting. I have, one of the narratives I've heard so much, and it was part of what helped pick the name for this podcast, is I don't want to waste time. And what I have seen with a lot of my clients, the things that they're actually doing is wasting more time than if they were more vulnerable, or if they were more upfront. It's sort of trying to be the cool girl or not scare somebody away, while still holding this narrative of like, I don't want to waste any time. But it's like, you are wasting time. And, fortunately for us in my relationship, we did get aligned. But I think I would have saved more time if I was really clear and upfront earlier in the relationship. So I think that's something to keep in mind, especially if it's this desire to not waste any time, kind of weighing that. Is it scarier to waste the time, or is it scarier to be vulnerable? And hopefully most of the time it's less scary to be vulnerable and be upfront about what you really want.
I really agree. And I think that I have a problem with the phrase wasting time, because I always think,
Same.
I want to say that in relationships, there's no such thing as wasted time. It's that fluffy attitude towards it that feels a bit like, no, you're always going to learn from the relationship, or it will happen when it's meant to happen, and all these tropes that we hear all the time, thrown around on social media, thrown around in cultural norms with our families and our aunts, and at dinners and all these things. But to be honest, they're there is a such thing as wasting time. And I can say truly that I had an experience of a breakup in my early 30s where we were not aligned, and there was no way that we were ever going to get aligned with the timelines. There were many other things with the relationship that also weren't worth pursuing and seeing it through. So that's also another reason why it ended. But I really went through that feeling of, I wish I would have asked sooner. Or
Yeah.
before we moved in together, I wish I would have been upfront and said, by this time, I want this, or this is important for me. But I brushed it under the carpet because it felt weird to have those conversations. It
Yeah.
did. It felt strange, but the biggest lesson was learned, because then fast forward however many years later, and I start my relationship with my now partner, I was so upfront. It was a little bit different because he was also aware that I have a podcast about being in your 30s and I'm posting every day, like, hi. And we actually met. We were already friends, but he was very aware of my egg freezing journey. So it wasn't a surprise to him. It wasn't like, oh, you're ready to have children now. It was more like, okay, I'm with this woman who is broadcasting to 100,000 people of her egg freezing journey. So yeah, it was a little bit of a different scenario, but I definitely think that the mindset that shifted in me had changed from little embarrassed, like, oh, like I
Yeah.
do want children, but I also don't want you to judge me for wanting to, like, thinking about that already before I've even gotten to know you, to being very upfront and saying, if this isn't your timeline, then no, we're not going to waste time. And that's not fluffy, and it's not maybe going to scare you away and you're going to run for the hills. And that's okay with me. That sits better with me than pretending. So yeah, that was my
Yeah, and
experience.
if they run for the hills, they weren't meant for you
Yeah.
anyways. And so really moving through that fear of the conversations, moving through that fear of being really vulnerable and honest with what you want is so worthwhile. It really is, because it gives you clarity. And what really creates a lot of this angst is being in uncertainty. I've seen so many women, I'm sure you too, being in these like situationships and not sure what's going on and what they're thinking and where they stand. And that creates so much anxiety. So thinking about how you're actively choosing to feel that and be in that is important, and bringing awareness to it, and then asking yourself, like, why am I sitting in uncertainty if I can get clarity through answers and through communication and through being upfront?
Totally. It's something that's very difficult when you have a low self-worth, or you've been hurt in the past, and maybe you
Yeah.
have some past trauma from a previous breakup, or even maybe something with family, with divorce. And I know that a lot of my clients have a lot of feelings towards these big questions and towards commitment and marriage and children. So for each person, I know it is individual, but yeah, just to hammer that point home, that I think we've really said now, it is just so worth having these conversations. And I'm such an advocate for them because of the experience that I've been through, and I'm sure you are too. Do you have any advice for how to have vulnerable conversations, or how to bring this up?
Yeah, and I want to say something about the self-worth piece first. I've seen this of course, with so many of our clients, and I think we always sort of moments in our lives struggle with that. I don't think it's, we always are so grounded, and we have these moments where days we don't feel great. I think the question I like to pose to people is, what, instead of kind of thinking like this is a waste of time, or I don't want to waste time, is what is the best use of my time? And for some women, sometimes that is pausing on dating. I had women that were so like gung ho, would never stop, always had to be on the apps, always had to be on the dates. And in my opinion, to them, I would say, is this the best use of time? Because I think stepping back and doing some self work would be the most valuable use of the time. I think the time wasted is kind of forcing yourself on all these dates. So if you're someone that's really struggling to kind of have these conversations, I might step back and think about, like, do I have more work to do? Do I have traumas to work through? Do I have to build up my confidence and self-worth? So I might start there, is to kind of just do this sort of, assessment of, where am I at? Am I grounded? And am I securely attached? Am I confident? Am I ready to have these conversations? If you're not, let's start getting curious as to why, and how you can get yourself to a place where you feel comfortable doing that. That would be my piece of advice to start. And then if you feel like you're there, it's kind of feel the fear and do it anyway. And
Yeah.
sometimes it's like, you can have accountability partners. Like, I have had like a friend say, okay, like, hold me accountable to talking to my partner by this time. So if you have to loop in a friend that kind of keeps you accountable, or if you have to, like, you're good at self accountability, set a date, set a time, like, it is happening by this time, and hold yourself to it, because it is scary, and rationalize not having the conversation every which way. So make sure you feel confident in where you're at to have those conversations, and then hold yourself accountable to doing it. Find a little way, whatever works. Like, again, a girlfriend, writing it down, something that keeps you accountable to having it.
When you were speaking, I was having such strong flashbacks. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that me and Ellie, my partner, were having this conversation. And I remember wanting to speak to him about it, but being like, I couldn't get the words out. And I think I had this a lot when it came to confrontation and dating, because I would say when I was dating again after the breakup, when I was 33, and then between 33 and 35, when I was out there meeting new people and going on many, many dates, if I started seeing somebody, was very upfront, not necessarily just about the wanting kids and timelines, but more about, okay, is this going anywhere? How do you feel? Really putting my cards on the table very, very early on, which I never used to do before. When I was dating before that breakup, I would move away from confrontation as fast as possible and avoid it like the plague. And then all of a sudden, I did a lot of work on myself actually during the year of being 33, 34. And then by the time I was dating in the run up to my 35th birthday and freezing my eggs, I was like, there's no stopping me. I would just say what I thought, but still. And even though I was such an advocate for it and I can give the best advice about it, the words still get stuck in your throat. That feeling of, I really want to speak to this person or say my truth, but saying your truth is so frightening. So
it's so scary. I always envision this double dutch of I'm going to say it now. I'm not going to say it now. I'm going to say it now. I'm going to say it, and having this internal dialogue. I mean, for me too, having this internal dialogue of do I say it now? It is still kind of scary, but things left unsaid just weigh so heavily. And so again, kind of asking yourself what is scarier, what feels worse. And really what feels worse is to internalize, not have the conversation, not say what you really mean. And I think sometimes we don't bring enough awareness to how bad that really feels. We're kind of doing these things to serve this function of comfort and safety. It's too scary. So by not saying something, I'm safe, I'm comfortable. But if you really, really think about it, you're not. You're probably in turmoil. You're probably in real turmoil.
I always say that for me anyway, the comfort zone is usually actually very, very uncomfortable. So I think that really runs true here when you think about it, that not saying something actually is keeping you safe and it's comfortable, but you're not comfortable. Because if you were comfortable, you would absolutely not feel the urge. You wouldn't be calling your friend. You wouldn't be journaling or speaking to your therapist and really thinking, why do I want to tell this person this thing, but I'm stuck. So yes, that is
and then
so
you're probably the furthest away from the thing that you want.
So true. Very, very true. Okay, so I want to talk about egg freezing because I want to tell you, and I'm sure you know this as well, that whenever I post anything about egg freezing on my Instagram stories or anything, I get many questions asking me about the process, asking me how many eggs that I got, asking me the latest question is, did I use the eggs for the baby that I had last year?
Yeah.
And it's a very hot topic. And a lot of women, I think, are starting to have doubts about it. This is what I'm seeing a lot in the literature and in social media. I haven't spoken about it for a very long time because when I did it a couple of years ago, I did a few podcast episodes around it and I actually recorded and shared my journey. But since then, I haven't been having so many conversations about it. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about egg freezing. And I know that's a really broad question because I'm sure you have many different thoughts and directions you can take it. But I'll just throw it out to you and we'll see what comes up.
Yeah. I mean, that's so interesting that you say that. I'm starting to see similar things, that there's still a lot of questions around it. I think we've made so much progress in putting more information out there, having more conversations, more women sharing their stories around egg freezing. But I think there's still a lot of unknowns. And I will say, even going through my secondary infertility journey, there's still so much I didn't know about fertility health. So there's still a lot more to be learning. There's still a lot more to be educating on. I think it's still a great option if it's available to you. I mean, one of the problems still is it's very, very, very expensive. What I'm learning too is that there's a lot more we can do for our fertility health if egg freezing is not an option, if egg freezing is not something that you see yourself wanting to do. There's so much I've learned sort of more holistically, lifestyle wise, nutrition, supplements that can help preserve our egg quality. I mean, we are seeing women getting pregnant in their late. I mean, I was 39 when I got pregnant. We're seeing women get pregnant in their 40s. I still think there's a lot to learn about fertility and fertility health. We're seeing a lot of things come out, particularly about like GPL1s and sort of their use in fertility. And it's very difficult because the fertility world is speaking a very different language than like the holistic functional medicine world. And hopefully we'll see some integration. Well, I'll say a couple things. I do think it is still extremely important that women go get their fertility health checked if motherhood is something you want for you. And even if it's not, because our fertility health is indicative of our overall health. So first and foremost, I would say every woman should understand and know their fertility health. And the other thing I would say is if it is something that you're considering, do your research, talk to people that have done it. There's a lot of amazing platforms like yours that talk about it. There's so many women sharing their stories. The other thing to consider is getting really clear on your family vision. A question one of my guests shared with me that was asked of her at a consult was, how many children do you want to have? And that wasn't a question they had asked me. And I will say kind of where I am now in trying to have my second, I wish I'd done another round, but no one had asked me that question. So I would also think about, what does your family vision look like? And what does that mean for what you have to do now? Because that might mean more than one round. But again, it's a deeply personal decision and it's not an easy decision. And when we talk about time, I've had so many women, myself included, that when they finally made the decision, everyone had wished they'd done it sooner. So to all those women that are a little bit younger, I've had a guest on that did it in her 20s. I mean, it's just something if you want children, to explore and to explore potentially sooner.
I really echo that message about every woman, and I hate to use the word should because I don't like shoulds, but let's say every woman, like you said,
I hate that word.
We hate the word should. But I would say not every woman who wants to be a mother, but every woman who is sitting in bed at night before they go to sleep and fretting or anxious, out Googling or thought loops about whether they will be able to have a child because of their age, because of their fertility, has the option to go and have a fertility MOT. And I'm not sure about what it's like in the States, but there are now many companies who do easy access fertility tests where you can check levels, and it's not cheap. It's obviously not subsidized, but it's not a huge dent in the pocket to go and just have a look. I think a lot of women feel that that's taboo if they're too young, because it feels like, why would I do that if I'm only in my late 20s? Or if I'm only in my early 30s? It just seems so extreme. But at the end of the day, it's your body, your body it doesn't have to be a secret. It can actually just be something to check. And I'm also a huge advocate of, knowledge is power, and you're just collecting data about yourself. And I think it's taboo because people say, wow, why would I need to know this if I'm not actually even dating somebody or, at that stage? I disagree. I think exactly like you said, we have the right to know at any age. And I also think that people are scared of knowing that maybe they have a problem. And I think that fear holds a lot of women back from knowing. And I speak to all of my friends who say, I want to freeze my eggs, and I say, go and check. And they say, I'm just going to wait another year. And I say, why? And they say, well, I'm really nervous that something bad will come up in the result. Okay, so then if it's bad, it's better to know now than it would be in another year or 5 years. And I get it. I really want to validate anyone listening who also has these fears. It's really normal to feel afraid because we think that our bodies might not be capable of doing something, but it is better to know. And interested to know what you think about this. The data isn't always accurate. The numbers on the piece of paper from the egg freezing, whether it's the number of eggs, your AMH level, which is your ovarian reserve, your egg reserve, or the FSH levels, all the other ways that we measure fertility, don't necessarily indicate or predict a woman's ability to fall pregnant. So I think that's also really important to remember, that you should go and collect the data, but that data isn't going to be necessarily what's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think our overall work where we're aligned is that there are way too many narratives that perpetuate fear for women. There's way too much pressure on what life should look like and by when. And these are just all outdated narratives. And it applies to fertility too, where we have this narrative that 35 is the cliff. It is not true. It is not the case. And it is perpetuated continuously. So women are afraid. Also, I totally validate the fear to go find out the information. I mean, I've had so many clients experience that. The other thing we need to dismantle is that if there is a problem, it can be fixed. The fertility world, the medical world wants you to believe the cliff is 35 and wants you to believe that if something is wrong, it's like you're screwed. There are women, I had women on here that had low ovarian reserve in their 20s, did a ton of lifestyle changes, nutrition changes, and got naturally pregnant. So we can't continue to perpetuate narratives that make women so afraid to the point that they don't even want to go check on their fertility health. And I think we need to create more narratives that it's okay, if there is a problem, we can fix it. We can work on it. And that's the biggest point we need to be making, that like we can't do anything if we don't have the information. So if we don't know, we can't implement strategies and interventions to get you healthier, to heal. Your body is made to heal. So I would kind of perpetuate that narrative. It's like, let's get the information. So if there is something, we'll heal it. We'll heal it.
And I love the point about, and the fact that you have experience of this with guests, with clients, of being able to turn your fertility around in a holistic way that is through nutrition, through lifestyle choices. Because I think the biggest pushback, and also linked to the fear, is the money aspect of it. And I always feel in a way nervous and uncomfortable when I speak about egg freezing to my wider audience. I actually created a separate Instagram account to share my journey, mostly because I wanted it to be a little bit behind closed doors, because I didn't want every single person who would potentially come across my Instagram page to see that. But, you know, I always feel nervous because I felt in a way really privileged that I was able to do it. But then actually, this is also maybe taboo to say, but I prioritized it, which means I saved up for it. And I know it's more expensive in the States than where I did it in Israel, but in general, it's something that takes a big part of your savings, or is something that you really have to work towards. And I'm not going to go too far down the rabbit hole of whether I was 100% certain I wanted to become a mother when I froze my eggs, because I actually didn't. I knew that I wanted to, but it wasn't like the be all and end all of my life. But still, I was willing to put money on it. And I think a lot of women who look at it and think, wow, that's so expensive. And maybe the narrative there is, I don't know if I would put the money on that, or it feels uncomfortable for me to put it. I think it's something to talk about.
100%. And I feel very similar to you. I always try to be mindful of not just being like, just go freeze your eggs, because it's not that. One, it's a very difficult decision. Two, it's not always accessible to a lot of people because it is expensive. So I feel similarly to you in that I want to be careful that I'm not just saying, go freeze your eggs, because it isn't unfortunately available to everybody. I mean, I think we are making progress in terms of like making it a little bit more affordable. And then there being programs out there that, I think, I forget the name of the company, that if you donate some of your eggs, they'll cover your egg freezing. So there are other options popping up. There's more companies covering it. But I always want to be mindful of finances aside too. It's very emotional decision. It's a very physically taxing decision. I loved what you shared about, again, going back to uncertainty. A lot of women aren't totally certain if they want to have children. And we need to normalize that too, because I've seen so many women have shame around not fully knowing, like, I'm a woman, why don't I have this huge pull to be a mother? It's like, that's another narrative we need to break down. Like, it is okay to be uncertain, but uncertainty is so uncomfortable. It's really, really uncomfortable. But there's so many areas of our lives where a lot of uncertainty exists. Also with egg freezing, right? You're putting a lot of money down. You're making a choice that is, physically taxing, emotionally taxing, to not even be sure what you get. And that's a very scary, that is a major, major gamble. It's like putting all your money on bread and not knowing if it's going to hit, because there's no way to know how many eggs you're going to get, if they're going to be mature. And so it's a huge decision.
I know. And I think that as well, that's where a lot of voices are coming out now against egg freezing, talking a lot about how it is a money-making industry, which it is. These are private companies who, somewhere I can see maybe you disagreeing. But
No, I agree.
you agree.
It is.
Agree.
It is. It's a business.
It's a business, exactly. And their marketing. And like we said, we're women in that narrative of fertility and the cliff and all of this, the advertising that we're being exposed to all the time. But it was really difficult for me and it is still difficult for me to answer the question of, is it worth it? Because we don't have enough data. There's not enough data collected now about women who have unfrozen who've defrosted their eggs to see the success. I think that is like very new, because egg freezing is quite new from the last 20 years. So I struggle sometimes when people ask me, because for me, and I really want to just talk about the uncertainty for 1 second, is that the reason that I froze my eggs in the end, after a lot of back and forth of deciding, was because I felt really uncertain about a lot of things. And I felt a lack of control, especially when it came to dating and meeting my future person. So I feel like I had to take control of something, and taking control of the egg freezing allowed a little bit of relief for me to therefore go and meet my person. And I speak about this a lot because I don't think it was a coincidence that Ellie and I had our first official date the week after my egg retrieval, and we were together ever since. So as joke, I'm like, oh, can I get a refund? Just put the eggs back in and get all that money back. But no, not really. I'm actually really happy that the eggies are in the freezer for the future. But it's very, I think it was very apt, because actually my head needed to have some certainty. And the certainty came with taking control and making a decision. And something happened, something shifted within me. Whereas before, I was really stuck. And I think I also saw you speaking about this as well, that back and forth of, should I do it? Should I not? Should I do it? Should I not? And how did you actually finally decide to go through with it?
Yeah, very similar for me. It was more, that's a really difficult question. Is it worth it? And it's a very personal answer for everybody. And what it finally came down to for me, because I almost didn't do it. I mean, I left the clinic after my consult like distraught, because it makes me so angry, because they showed me these numbers and said, basically, you're done. Like, you're 37, you're done. Like, it makes me really, really, I have to be really honest. It makes me really, really angry what we're telling women about their fertility health. It pisses me off, because it terrifies us and it makes us so afraid. And I left that clinic being like, well, what's the point? I'm going to get nothing. Like, this is like, which was not true. I got a very good number. But what it finally came down to for me, because again, you don't know what you're going to get going into it. It's a lot of money. I didn't have the money. I put it on a credit card. So that for me was like, I don't even have this money. I'm going to put myself into debt for this. Like, again, is it worth it? And what it came down to for me is I couldn't look back and regret that I couldn't be my future self and say, oh my God, if I just done this, like, I didn't want to regret it. And so that was sort of the final push for me to do it. But I love what you said about, and it did give me this relief, when it was successful for me. There was this huge sense of relief, and I felt like I could go back to my life, because I was so consumed. And I know this happens for so many women. It's happening for me right now, my secondary infertility journey. Like, we get so hyper focused on the thing that we desire greatly and we don't have yet, that we lose sight of everything else. And so when you take that pressure off and you can live life again, so many amazing things start to flow to you, and similarly, I had this question, like, think about the two best things in your life and how those came to be. And the two best things in my life are meeting my partner and having my son. Both of those things happened the second I took the pressure off of it. Literally, similar to you. I took the pressure off of like not having a partner, being single. A month later, I met my partner. We took the pressure off for having the kid. I was pregnant 2 weeks later. So it's really meaningful to take the pressure off these things. Love, enjoy your life. Look at everything that's going well. We get too focused on what is not happening yet. I always like to say yet, because let's trust that it's coming. And like, just enjoy, be in your life. And I know that's easier said than done, and that's what I was saying to you. I want to do these guest updates, because the second you take the pressure off things, everything starts to flow to you.
Why do you think that is? Do you think it's something For me, it's something a bit more spiritual, a bit more existential almost. Why do you think it happens that way?
I think we become so closed off. I think we become so closed off when we're so hyper focused on something else. And I think we're sending out messages to the universe that we're not open to receive. I think that that's what's very problematic about these very narrow blueprints of the way that life is supposed to look, is that it doesn't create an expansive vision of what life can be. And I just think when we get hyper focused on one vision or one thing, we leave ourselves so closed off, and we're kind of telling the universe, like, I don't want anything else but this thing. And it doesn't leave space to invite other things in that are probably more beautiful than what we even imagine.
I think it's really true. I've asked myself a lot, why do I think that everything happened for me once I had this relief from the egg freezing? And I think I can look at it from like a more logical point of view of, no, it just meant that I said, okay, let's just date this person, my now partner, because it doesn't matter if it works out or not, because I've got the eggs ready there. But I know it wasn't about, I think if you look at it logically, somebody with a very rational mind would say that. But I don't actually think that's true, because if I look back, and probably if I was to read journals during that time, I wasn't this like easy breezy, great if it doesn't work out. No, I was still, I want this to work out. I want to meet my person. I want this to be the real deal. So I think for me, it was a bit about that, but also something else. Like you said, I was inviting something else in. And I do think it's really important. And I've interviewed many a woman on my podcast, many a client as well, who have said really similar things. Like,
yeah,
I remember interviewing somebody.
And I think that's a good exercise I can offer to other people here, is thinking about when good things happened in your life and what state you were in, right? I think it's like when we're in this state of like hyper focus or sadness, I just think there's blocks. We're creating blocks that are not letting things in. And so I would invite anybody to think about when to have pick two amazing things that's happened in your life and kind of think about the state you were in. Were you open? Were you inviting? And I think when you get really kind of in radical acceptance of where you are in your life, which is where I was when I met Rob, I was like, here I am, 34. I have a lot of amazing things going on. And if marriage and babies are not meant for me, I'm going to build a life that's beautiful and happy too. And sort of just being in that acceptance, I think, opened up a lot for me. I think also for me, my partner is not someone I ever would have dated. And there was something about coming into that acceptance that just opened me up to a different type of person. I chose all the wrong people. I chose very, emotionally unavailable people. And when I met Rob, is really interesting. The universe put another one of these emotionally unavailable people in my life and Rob simultaneously. And the universe is like, what are you going to do now? And I was kind of going back down the old path, and like having these two people side by side really showed me what type of person my partner was. And that was it. And we've been together almost 10 years.
Wow. I had a really similar experience actually with the emotional unavailability. And when I first met Ellie and we were friends, I had that test and I had this great guy in front of me. And there was another also great guy, but very emotionally unavailable, who was also in front of me. And my mind was like hyper focused on the thing that I couldn't have. And Ellie used to joke, I used to post things on my stories like, where are all the emotionally available men hiding? And he would be like, here, and like send me his address, and I'd be like, haha, he's so funny. And then eventually I was like,
that's so
and eventually cute. I was like, oh wait, why not? I think it was my therapist or my coach at the time was like, what's wrong with a nice,
I know
all the things he has to offer? And I'm like, oh yeah, like actually right now, emotional availability and like a stable, loving, kind man does actually sound good. But 2 years before, it didn't sound good. It sounded too dull or not dramatic enough,
yes,
or like I didn't have to prove myself, which I really used to love to have to prove myself when I was looking for a relationship. So yeah, this is really, really interesting, isn't it, to think about how this can show up in dating.
Yeah, it's interesting too. I had a similar feeling of like, this is kind of boring, but oh my gosh, when I first met Rob, I was like, he's kind of boring. And he is like the least boring person ever. He is like hysterical and fun, and we just have to be more expansive in our vision. We can be so limited in how we're viewing life. And that's why I think it's just so amazing to have more women sharing stories of paths that look different. That's why I love your work and what you're doing and what you're still living by. I mean, you just up and moved, it's just, there's so many different visions that are possible. And we need to continue to dismantle this one blueprint that looks one way. It's so problematic. And I think we just have to continue to get expansive and open to, how we see life and what we want to invite in.
Do you think that in recent years, the timelines are changing, or do you think these narratives are stronger than ever before?
Oh, great question.
The reason I'm asking it is because I feel like on one hand, the world has become more open to doing things in different orders, or not necessarily having to have a child by the time that you're 30. I think the age has been pushed back a bit now. And I think that, obviously if we look at our parents' generation and the generation before that, they would get married so young. And now obviously, even statistically speaking, marriage is happening late. So on one hand, I can see the pattern of the narratives and timelines changing. But on the other hand, it feels just the same. It feels like all the clients I work with struggle with the same thing. So I'm like,
I know,
is anything actually changing?
I know. I think I'm that's why I feel a little stumped on it, because I think both things are true. And I'm a huge believer that multiple things can be true at once. So I do think there is more examples and more models of different timelines, which is beautiful. I think what's happening more, and I'll speak personally, is it's more internal pressure of timeline, and I'll share kind of like, I wish I had a second baby 2 years ago, and it's just, we're kind of in this like hellish journey right now. And so I'm putting the pressure on that timeline. And I'm less in trust of like, it'll work out and happen when it's supposed to. So I'm wondering if it's sort of shifted to be more internal, the pressure of timelines, because externally we're having more models and examples that timelines have shifted, that people aren't, having babies in their 20s as much as they used to. That was kind of, a parent's generation. You get married 22, 23, and you have children. But yeah, I guess both are still true. I guess I can only speak personally, or for my clients, it's still that internal pressure of the things we want when we want them.
The internal pressure is something as well that it's really hard to decipher where the external pressure finishes and when the external pressure begins. Because for me, I had lots of external pressure, as we all do, but it was the internal pressure that was causing me so much stress, because I didn't actually really have someone specific in my life. My parents are very liberal. I think everyone was a bit, even maybe my grandma was somebody who would put pressure on me. But apart from that, everyone was never saying anything to me, especially because I was saying to everyone on my social media that it's ridiculous. But yeah, even though no one really was saying, oh my God, Emma, you have to do these things right now, I still felt such strong internal pull. And I do think that when it comes to children, maybe it is quite biological and it is something our bodies are signaling us, and maybe that's what happens. And I think that is actually what happened to me, because I was never maternal and I never really was interested in children at all. And it was a huge question mark. I think I always knew deep down I would have children, but it had no pressure to do it. I remember for many, many years saying, oh, if I could have children in 10 more years, I would always wait 10 more years. And that was something that I said 31, 32, 33, 34, and then like boom, 35. And I was like, okay, now I need to freeze my eggs. And I guess the big question mark there is, was that my body telling me that it was ready? Or was it just so internalized, these messages from everywhere about the fertility cliff, that on some level I was just a victim of that?
Yeah. And to your point, it's like, I think it takes sort of sitting with it to decipher what's what. I think what has happened is that we've internalized all this generational messaging and external messaging. And sometimes we're not clear on whose voice it is, if it's actually ours. And that's a lot of work I do with my clients, is to understand like, whose voice is it truly? If it's really your voice, great. But it really takes work to decipher, because it becomes so internalized. We think it's our own voice. And so we hold it to be true. Like, I want these things. I want these things by this time. And if we start to really break it down and do sort of the deciphering, we might realize it's another voice. It's an external voice. It's a generational voice. But that's the work, is to get really clear on what we actually want based on what we're telling ourselves, what's really authentically true to ourselves. I do think there is, and I think that's the beauty in kind of doing things later in life, is that we become more clear to like attached to our own voice and our own authentic self. And so it doesn't surprise me that there came a time maybe where that question was answered for you, or you felt more ready for motherhood. And that's important to think about too. There's so much value in sort of age and wisdom and knowing, because we get clear on who we are, what we want, who we want out of a partner. I think when we're younger, it's hard to know those things, right? Because maybe we haven't done that deciphering yet to understand whose voices are saying we should, again, that terrible word. So yeah, that's the work, is really getting clear on what we want. And even the by when, I mean, even if we're clear on what we want, we don't really control the by when. So that's some more work to do, to kind of trust in timing, which is very difficult. I'm having a hard time with that myself right now. But I guess, let's not miss out on life just because we're waiting for the things to come.
I'm so happy that you said that this last point. Actually, just before, I don't know if you saw, there's this new Instagram trend for reels where you write, it says you went for a coffee with yourself 10 years ago. And I was writing it today, and I posted the reel, and it just brought up so much for me, because I wanted the message to be that, the timing is as it should be, and don't wait, basically, or don't feel left behind because it's happening as it should. And yeah, I think that there are hardships, and obviously what you're currently going through with fertility, and potentially what I will also go through if we decide to have another baby. And I think that there are true obstacles for women to have, it's scientific, it's biological. It's not, I think a lot of the time people call me irresponsible for talking about it's okay to have babies later and all these things, because they say no, women's bodies, yada, yada, yada. But at the end of the day, there is something special about having your 30s being full of other things that aren't children. And
yes,
having
oh my gosh,
so much wisdom. And I keep having these moments, after becoming a mum, where I posted it on Threads the other day, and I got the most ridiculous response, because I was like, I had a baby, I'm 37 and I have no idea what I'm doing, and I feel like a teenage mum. And everyone was like, lol, me too. And I'm just like, how do people have children younger? I thank God. I'm so happy it happened now, because I'm still not developed enough to grow another human being. And there's so, many things that it brings up so much. And yeah, I'm really grateful, actually, in retrospect, that I didn't do this when I was 22.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Me too. I mean, I think about all that I got to do in my 30s. I got to meet my partner. We got to travel everywhere. I traveled, by myself. I got to build a business that I love and I'm so proud of, and I'm a better mom for it. I'm more patient. I don't feel like I'm missing out on life, or that he's like making me miss out on life in any way. And I think the very same thing is, I couldn't have done this in my 20s. I couldn't have done this in my 30s. I'm so grateful that I had all the opportunity that I was able to have, because I was, still, not a mother yet. I had a really, really great guest on who, she's single mother by choice, and she's phenomenal. And she's getting a lot of slack for that. And she's in her 40s. And she posted this incredible thing. It's like, we have normalized a certain way of doing things, and it's okay for a 20-something-year-old in a bad relationship to have a child and not be securely, emotionally grounded. She's like, but a woman in her 40s that's done so much work on herself, is so securely attached, is so grounded. It's like we can't accept that. And that's really problematic, because there's so much value we can bring to our children when we're better versions of ourselves, when we're more emotionally well and stable. So again, there's still a lot of work to kind of dismantle these things.
Yeah, I was just thinking, the narrative is so strong that about women's aging, and about women not being in their prime after a certain age, and the fertility prime. It's just, yeah, I think that's like a whole other hole that we could go into talking about it. So
I just think we should go down that route. I just think we get better and better with age. I think we learn more about ourselves, understand more about ourselves. I don't know, maybe I shouldn't say that, but I think maybe there's certain people that don't want us to be stronger, more well-informed, and more powerful. But yeah, I think, again, kind of removing this fear that we're wasting time or we're running out of time is really, really important. And the thing with timing, it's difficult. It's kind of at the point of arrival. We're like, oh, it all makes sense. But the lead up is we're so anxious. We're so sad. And again, like, how do we trust in the timing and knowing that like it is all going to work out? Because if we can hold on to that, we can enjoy our lives now way, way more. And I think, it's saying this out loud for myself as well, whenever and hopefully God willing, the second child comes, I'll be like, oh, it all makes sense now. But now that I'm in it, I'm kind of like, this sucks. I'm miserable. I'm depressed. I'm so sad. So the work to really kind of trust the timing, because it's never once in my life that I get to the thing and I'm like, oh, well, that doesn't make sense. It's like, no, that's how it was supposed to happen now. And here's why. And I see it all now. And so if we can be in that, hold on to that, I think life would be way lighter.
I love that. And I completely agree. And it's something that I've learned the hard way as well, because looking back now on how I felt each year of my 30s, I always felt the pressure. And now I look back and I'm like, but why did I feel the pressure? I was so young. I was so, all of the things. And it's funny, isn't it? Because I know that you said you met your partner at 34. I met my partner at 35. Now I'm about to turn 38. And I'm like, that's so young. 34 is like you were a baby to meet your partner, but obviously we weren't. Like, we still felt that pressure. So it's just, really important. And the lessons just keep coming back, don't they? Like, just as you're saying, everything that you're talking about, also we're both thought leaders in this world and we both still go through the things. And I can say also that the timeline pressures are always there, no matter what. You just meet someone. When you're going to get engaged, you get engaged. When you're going to have a baby, you have a baby. When you're going to have your second baby, and it's like, it's never ending. It's tiring. It's just tiring being a woman.
I think I always love the word expansive, just if we could hold space for both things, right? If you can kind of like, it's not going to go away. And I think that's the same, as a therapist, when we work with anxiety, it's like, it's not going to go away. Let's learn how to like be with it, cope with it, manage it. And I think the same applies for timelines. Like, let's kind of leave it in the background a bit. Let's acknowledge that it's there, but then let's not miss out on everything else. And what I see happen for so many people, myself included, is like, it's smack right in front of our face, the timeline, and we can't see anything else. So just like kind of create more space, move it off to the side a bit, and let's be able to see everything else that's going on.
Amazing. Great way to end the podcast. Thank you so much. It's been so nice to talk about all of these things and to reconnect again. Can you please share with the audience where they can find you and where they can listen to your amazing podcast?
Yes, absolutely. The podcast is Quiet the Clock. It's on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, anywhere you can get your podcasts. We're on Instagram and TikTok at Quiet the Clock Pod. I have a group therapy practice called NYC Therapeutic Wellness. If anybody's looking for a therapist, I have a great team of therapists there. And check us out. I mean, we have very similar messaging and we're so passionate about the same things. So I'm sure your community would appreciate what we're putting out as well.
100%. And now we're going to just jump across into the next recording, because for our community for this month, we're going to be talking all about fertility. And so I have got a few more questions for Beth from the community, basically asking her advice for now she's in her 40s, what she would have wished she would have known in her 30s. So Beth's going to answer those questions. And if you would like to listen to them, then you're invited to join the Turning community. All of the details are in the podcast notes. And bye, everybody. And I'll see you on the podcast next week.